Welcome back, guys, to another YouTube video. Today we're going to be talking about callbacks, promises, and async await. This is going to be foundation. So if you've never understood this, and if you're someone who's been doing it but you don't really understand what callbacks are or promises or async await, this video is going to focus on that for sure. So what we're going to do here is that, yeah, it's going to be nice and simple. We'll go through everything here, and yeah, let's get to it. Now, to talk about callbacks, promises, and async and await, we need to understand what synchronous operations are and also what asynchronous operations are. And we need to understand the differences between them and also the similarities. So, synchronous operation entails having each step of the operation wait for the previous step to execute completely. This means no matter how long a previous process takes, subsequent processes won't kick off until the former is completed. Now, asynchronous operations, on the other hand, defer operations. Any process that takes a lot of time to process is usually run alongside other synchronous operations and completed in the future. Now, let's check out some code snippets to really explain this synchronous operations and also these asynchronous operations because you need to understand them to understand callbacks, promises, and also async await. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a function. This function, I'm going to call it plantation. And what we're going to do in this function is we're going to console.log. I'll say plant the corn. I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and change the thing we're logging. And what we'll log here is we'll log water. Wow, I can't spell today. Water the flower, water the plant. And then we'll paste again. Then it's going to be add fertilizer. I'm going to paste this. And what else do we need to do? Yep, we need to call our function. Then we'll say plantation. And we save that. And now you can see here, we get a we get the log plant the corn, water the plant, and add fertilizer. Now what I want us to do is we're going to tweak this code so that we can make watering the plant actually take longer than adding fertilizer. Yeah, we do that. We do a set timeout. And we're going to use the arrow function. And I'm going to put this right here. And with set timeout, we actually have to specify how long we want it to have a timeout. So I'll make it 3000 milliseconds. And now if we save it, you can see right here we have plant the corn, add fertilizer, and now we get water the plant. And I'm sure you noticed that the set timeout function makes the operation asynchronous by deferring plant watering to occur after 3 seconds. The whole operation doesn't pause for 3 seconds so we can log water plant. Rather, the system goes ahead to apply fertilizer and then water plant after 3 seconds. Functions as first-class objects. It's important to keep in mind before we go through the rest of this crash course that JavaScript functions are first-class objects, and as such, functions have the ability to be assigned to a variable and also be treated as a value. They also have the ability to have other functions in them, and they can also return other functions to be called later. Now let's really dive into callback functions, and then we'll go to promises, and after that we'll discuss async await to handle deferred operations. When a function simply accepts another function as an argument, this contained function is known as a callback. Using callback functions is a core functional programming concept. You can find them in most JavaScript code, either in simple functions like setInterval, event listening, or making API calls. Now I'm going to show you how we write callback functions. Well, I'll have a function first that says greetings or greeting. And the way I'm going to show you a callback function is we're going to use the set interval and inside it, we can use two ways. We can use the ES6 arrow function, but I'll show you the way we do it without that. So we just say function, and the function doesn't have to have a name. That's why it's a callback. And after that, what we're going to do next is we're going to console.log. Hola. Teaching you some Spanish if you don't know Spanish. ¿Cómo estás? And yes, after this, now we tell it how long it's going to take for it to, because this is a set interval, so it's going to keep on repeating. So I'll give it 2000 milliseconds, and that's it. So now all we need to do is we need to call this function right here. So say greeting, we save it, and now you can see right here, now it shows como estás, and now you see 2, 3. It's going to keep on going, going to keep on printing it. We can see right here that the set interval right here, it accepts a callback as its first parameter. So this is the first parameter. And also the second parameter is the time it's going to take for it to keep on calling this function right here. So that's how it works. And I'm going to also show you another callback with maps. That's what we're going to do next. So with a map, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a constant, and I'll call this a list. Yeah, so I'm going to show you. I'll put a comment callback using map function. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to have a constant people, and this is going to be an array that takes man, woman, and child. I know what, I'm going to actually change this to not people, to family. Yeah, so we have this array that has man, woman, and child. So the next thing we're going to do, just going to put a comment right here. We're going to create a new array. And this new array the next thing we're going to do is we're going to loop over the array and also map the data with the new contact to a new content. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over the map and map. What we're going to do is we're going to loop over the array. We're going to loop over the array and then we'll map the data to a new content or to a new list or to a new array. So how we do that is we'll say constant new, I'm going to put underscore list is equal to family dot map, and now we're going to have the callback function, and this time I'm going to use ES6 arrow function, so I'm just going to do like this, put some space instead of using function before here. Instead of doing it like this, I can also just do it ES6, and you see the error showing on the arrow because I already added function, but when I remove the function the error goes away. And as our input right here, I'm going to put value. Now what we do next is we're going to return value plus happy plus the string happy. So we're going to return value plus the string happy. Now what happens is that now what we just need to do is we need to console.log our new list. So we save it, and what we're seeing here is man happy, woman happy, child happy. Could also add some space in between, just do like this. So man happy, or we could even switch it up and do like this, return happy plus value. So now I create some space here, remove the space before, and I can see we have happy man, happy woman, happy child. In the code snippet, we use the map method to iterate through the array list. The method accepts a callback function which states how each element of the array will be manipulated. Callback functions can also accept arguments as well. Callback functions can be named or be anonymous functions. In our first example, we used anonymous callback functions. Now let's take a look at named callback functions. So what we do here first, we create a function and we call it greetings with a capital G. And then as its argument, we put name. So the next thing we do is we're going to console.log. And what we're going to console.log, we're going to use this backwards, and this is string literal. So what I want us to say is, what's up? And then curly brackets, name. Say welcome to the crew with an exclamation mark. This function is assigned the name greeting and has an argument of name. We also use an ES6 template literal. You know what? Let me call this function. So you see what it actually does. And I'm just going to put Sam. Oh, wow, my spelling today. Sam. Because it says, what's up, Sam? Welcome to the crew. So we have a function that does this. Now let's use this function as a callback function. The way we can use this function as a callback is we'll create another function. And we'll call this function introduction. Now this function introduction is going to take a first name. It's also going to take a last name. And it's going to take a callback. Now we say constant full name is equal to, we use the string literal again, and I am going to make a video about string literals because they're really important. But yeah, so we use the string literal, and then we use the curly bracket, we say first name, this is the first argument, and after that, we'll say last name, which is the second argument. Yeah, I'm just going to make this like this so we can see everything. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say callback, and I'll say callback full name. Now, I want to show you the power of this. When we say introduction, and I put Sam as first name, and I put code as last name. And after that, I'm going to call greetings, the function we already have. Save it. Now you can see the difference. It says, "What's up, Sam? Welcome to the..." This is the first one. This is what greetings does. This is what the function greeting does. But with introduction now, we've been able to add a first name and a last name and say the same message. I hope you notice the usage of the callback. The succeeding bracket after the functions are not used when passing the function as a parameter. And I want you to note this. The callback function is not run unless called by its containing function. It is called back, hence the term callback function. Multiple functions can be created independently and used as callback function. This creates a multi-level function. When this function tree created becomes too large, the code becomes incomprehensible sometimes, and also it is not easily refactored. This is known as callback hell. Let's see an example of that. And you can see the example right here. We're assuming that these functions have been previously defined elsewhere. You can see how confusing it is to pass each function as a callback. Now, I want you to understand is that callback functions are useful for short asynchronous operations. When working with large set, this is not considered best practice. Because of this challenge, promises were introduced to simplify deferred activities. Now let's talk about promises. I promise to do this whenever this is true. If it is not true, then I won't. This is a simple illustration of JavaScript promises, and I know it sounds like if statements, but what I'll show you here is the big difference between promises and if statements. A promise is used to handle the asynchronous result of an operation. JavaScript is designed not to wait for asynchronous blocks of code to complete execution before other synchronous parts of the code can run. For example, when making an API request to a server, we have no idea if the servers are online or offline or how long it's going to take to process the server request. With promises, we can defer the execution of a code block until the async request is completed. This way, other operations can be running without interruption. Promises have three states, and the first one is pending. This is the initial state of the promise before an operation begins. Then we have fulfilled. This means that the specified operation was completed. And we also have rejected. This means the operation did not complete. An error value is usually thrown. The promise object is created using the new keyword and contains the name promise. This is an executor function which has a resolve and also a reject callback. As the names imply, each of these callback return a value, with the reject callback returning an error object. Now we're going to create a promise that actually does something. So we have a constant. And we set this constant whether to true. Then we have constant date, and that's equal to new promise. And you can see right here, promise, you can see the same syntax. And we're going to use ES6 arrows. And we're going to use ES6 arrow functions. So we say resolve and also reject. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to use the if statement and say if whether we want constant date details to equal. Now we have this constant date detail, which is an object. It's going to have name. And you know objects are key value pairs. This is going to be Indian restaurant. After that, we'll have location. That's going to be 45 street. Now we need to put this in quotes because it's a string. And forget the quotes because that's where we're getting an error. You need to signify, okay, a new object is coming out. And do the same thing. And after that, we'll say table and table of 6. Now we have an object, and this is what we want to happen. Now we say resolve. If it's true, we want you to resolve, and we call date details. Now we use an else statement because we're using an if. Else, we want you to reject. Now resolve, we want you to reject. And this reject, we want to have a new error. So we want an error message. And the error is going to say bad weather. The error is going to say bad weather. So no date you need to eat at home. Put our colon right here. And we can see in this code snippet that if weather is true, resolve the promise returning the data, dates details. Else, return an error object with data, bad weather, so no date. Now the next thing is to say date dot then, and then we'd have our function right here. I would put done as an argument. And here is where we would put the content from the resolve. After that, we'll say dot catch. I would say function. I would say error as its argument. The info from the reject is here. Using a promise that has been created is relatively straightforward. We chain then and that to our promises like this. Using the promise we created, let's take this a step further. The way we'll do that, we'll say constant my date, capital, is equal to function. I would put all this inside it. Right here, I would say console.log. We are going on a date with an exclamation mark. And then we also console.log done. Here in the error section, what we do is we just console.log error.message. Now we say my date, call it, and when we save it, you can see what we get right here. We say we're going on a date, and then we also get this right here, which is our object that we have above with the location, the name of the restaurant, and also the table, and which is table of 6. So you can see how we did this with promises, and we used the catch and also the then to have, and when we change this to false, you can see what happens to false. It says bad weather, so no date, you need to stay at home. So you can see now that we get a message, an error message, and we did that with promises using the catch and then, and also having our reject and resolve. So now the difference we can see between then and catch is that we can see that then receives a function with an argument which is the resolve value of our promise, and catch returns the reject value of our promise. Now let's note this, that promises are asynchronous. Now let's note that promises are asynchronous, and promises in functions are placed in a micro task queue and run when other asynchronous operations complete. Sometimes we may need to execute two or more asynchronous operations based on the result of a preceding promise. In this case, promises are chained. Now, still using our create promise, let's order an Uber if we're going on a date. Say order Uber, set that equal to function date details as its argument. And then we return new promise. Then we have our callback function. Use the ES6, resolve reject. Now we have a constant message. Set that equal to string literal, and we'll say get me an Uber driver, an Uber ASAP. And then we say to, this is basically us now having something to say, okay, we want an Uber driver because we actually want to leave the restaurant. Now we use our string literals. And say date details dot location, and then say where we are going on a date. After that, we resolve and say message. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll say constant my date, set that equal to function. And then inside this function, we'll have date dot then order Uber dot then. Now you see we're having them chained. And we'll say function as its argument done. And then we say console.log done. And after that we say .catch. And here I'm gonna use ES6 error. And here we just console.log error.message. I would say if we call my date, and we don't call it here, and we'll need to remove this declaration here. So you can see right now, we see get me an Uber ASAP to 85th Street. We're going on a date. Once the order Uber promise is chained with then, subsequent then utilizes data from the previous one. Now let's talk about async and await. An async function is a modification to the syntax used in writing promises. You can call it syntactical sugar over promises. It only makes writing promises easier. An async function returns a promise. If the function returns a value, the promise will be resolved with the value. But if the async function throws an error, the promise is rejected with that value. Now let's see an async function. We can see it right here. We have an async function and we have a promise function. And you can see the similarities and the differences. In the promise, we have the keyword promise. We also have resolve. But in the async, you can see we have the keyword async, and that is before the function keyword and also the function name. And we just use return. So you can see the differences right here. From the code snippets, my right and your right, they are equal and will both resolve to 2017 Dodge Charger. Also, when a promise is rejected, an async function is represented like this. Say function foo, and then we return promise dot reject. $25, and then this is equal to async function. And this is equal to async. Then we just say throw 25. Await is only used with an async function. The await keyword is used in an async function to ensure that all promises returned in the async function are synchronized, and that means they wait for each other. Await eliminates the use of callbacks like then and catch. In using async and await eliminates the use of callbacks like then and catch. In using async and await, async is prepended when returning a promise, await is prepended when calling a promise. Try and catch are also used to get the rejection value of an async function. Let's see this with our date example. And I hope you're noticing that I'm using the same example, I'm just modifying it because I want you to see the relationship between these three things. Now with async, we say async function if we want to create the same thing. My date. Now we say try, select date details equal to await, await date. Then we say let message equal to await, order Uber. Date details. Now we console.log message. Next time we say catch, error, and we console.log error.message. So now after that, we'll call it back. We'll say async, use the error function, say await my date. Yeah, so right now you can see that we have the weather, it's false, and we have the date and all that. And we also have our order Uber. Now with the async await, we can use these two functions to actually create the same thing we did with the promises. And after that, you just have your async, you call it back, and then you say await my date. And when you save it, you can see it says bad weather, so no day, you need to stay home. It says the same thing we did with our promises, and that's the whole point of this. And when I change this to true, you can see it says get me an Uber ASAP at this street, we're going on a date. Now, understanding the concepts of callback promises and async await can be rather confusing, but so far we have been able to work and carry out asynchronous operations in JavaScript. And these concepts come in handy a lot when making API requests and event handling. Yeah, so and if you got to this part, this means you're really serious, and I hope you understood everything we just dealt with here. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, like the video, smash the like button, and you know what, subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'm gonna wrap things up and I'll keep things moving, and I'll see you in the next YouTube video.